Ken Griffin's Citadel made $16 billion last year, the largest annual hedge fund profit on record. Whether you like to hear it or not, Ken Griffin, aka the mastermind behind Citadel the hedge fund and Citadel Securities the market maker, is raking in money. Honestly, before we get into the details of this story, I have an interesting thing I want to say at the end, which I think is going to blow some of your minds of the end game for Ken Griffin and where this all can be leading, because I think it's a lot more devious than you might even be thinking. Ken Griffin's U.S. hedge fund Citadel made $16 billion in profit after fees last year, the largest annual profit ever made by a hedge fund manager. Citadel topped the top 20 hedge fund managers list, beating John Paulson's 2007 $15 billion gain, which was until now been described as the greatest trade ever. Overall, the top 20 managers made $22.4 billion net of fees for their investment in 2022 and have made almost $692 billion net of fees for their investors since inception. Hedge fund managers overall lost $208 billion last year. So please understand these gains, that was definitely not par for course. Most hedge funds lost, but there were a couple that made outsized returns. Citadel's record gain was down to being a diversified firm with multiple sources of profits and active capital allocation and risk management. So once again, just a reminder here, we're talking about Citadel, the hedge fund. Citadel Securities, the market maker, that's actually not being counted in this. Citadel Securities, the market maker, they made $7 billion last year. The $16 billion we're talking about right now is from hedge fund activities. You can see here, Citadel, Ken Griffin, $16 billion, Bridgewater, Ray Dalio, 6.2, D.E. Shaw made 8.2, Millennium 8. They're just making disgusting money. In 2022, the largest gains were once again made by the large multi-strategy hedge funds like Citadel, D.E. Shaw, and Millennium. These managers collectively generated $32 billion of net gains and were able to be combined strong performances from several sources, including macro, trading, quant, and equity dispersion strategies. Many equity long/short managers failed to anticipate or adequately hedge against the impact of raising interest rates and were able to generate sufficient profits to compensate on the short side. So that's why so many performed poorly. And then there was a couple who were kind of properly predicting the trend and made massive, massive returns. So this brings me to what I alluded to at the start of this. What is the end game for Mr. Griffin? What is the end game for the guy who is massive hedge fund, massive market maker? We know he's moving the headquarters of Citadel from Chicago to Florida. We know that he's made many, many donations to the GOP and is specifically outspoken in support of DeSantis. Now, if you think about this, you might be wondering, why DeSantis? Why not some other right-leaning guy? Like, what is it about it? Well, at first, you know that Ron DeSantis is the governor of Florida. Citadel's moving their headquarters there. So for someone like him, that's just a business move. Let's be honest. It is 100% a business move to be very, very friendly with the guy who's the governor of your state. But I don't think it stops there. And the reason I don't think it stops there is I think Ken Griffin, as I said, is a little bit more devious, a little bit more planning, a little bit more cunning than maybe we are giving him credit for. Think about it like this. If Ken Griffin is really buddy-buddy with Ron DeSantis, let's say Ron DeSantis ends up becoming president, Ron DeSantis is able to pick his Treasury Secretary. Well, someone with a track record such as Citadel is a very, very reasonable person to select. Then you might be thinking, but why would he want to do this? Why would Ken Griffin want to get into politics? Why would he want to saddle up with Ron DeSantis beyond just normal Citadel being in Florida with the governor and that's a good business case? It's as simple as this. When you get a federal position such as being the Treasury Secretary or any of those high-level federal positions, you get to divest your investments with no capital gains. I personally believe that Ken Griffin might be setting up for the best exit of all time. If he is selected to be Treasury Secretary and serves his term, he is allowed to sell his entire equity stake in Citadel and pay zero taxes. Zero. Zilch. Nada. We had this rule because basically if you're going to be a public servant, they don't want it to be a punishment of taxes. So they're basically saying no taxes. But obviously, the system could be gamed. So in the scenario that he's really interested in Florida, really interested in bringing Citadel there, really interested in supporting the GOP, specifically Ron DeSantis, if he ends up becoming Treasury Secretary, he has to sell his stake in Citadel, which right now has a high evaluation. If he sells everything, because he's Treasury Secretary, the government gives him a pass and says no taxes whatsoever, saving himself billions and billions and billions of dollars. Now, is this guaranteed? Absolutely not, but I just wanted to share it with you, a little bit food for thought, because like I said, many of us already know that he's kind of a cunning, devious dude. But I don't even think we're giving enough credit, because I think he's thinking on a whole nother level of like, hey, you know what's cooler than a couple billion is even more billions. Obviously, I would love to know your thoughts.